Namaste and welcome. At the Hindu Parenting Podcast, we discuss many issues of relevance to our identity as Hindus. We all understand individual identity, but the sense of identity does not stop at the individual level. Groups of people have a collective identity, which is just as important to a growing child's self-esteem as his individual identity. A strong and coherent collective identity leads to confidence. What is the state of collective Hindu identity today? How does it affect generations of parents and children? To help us understand group identity, we have an internationally renowned clinical psychologist and professor, Dr. Rajat Mitra, who has generously agreed to share his important insights with us today. Dr. Rajat Mitra has worked with many different groups of people across the world and is the author of the well-acclaimed book, The Infidel Next Door. Namaste, Rajatji. Thank you for coming here to talk with us today.
Namaste. It is my honor to be here on this podcast and to share.
The pleasure is entirely ours, Rajatji. Many of us are all too familiar with the silence we encounter when we try to explore our past or our history, our identity as Hindus. In fact, I've seen that many Hindus switch off when they hear the word Hindu itself. In your experience as a psychologist, why does this happen? And what explains the silence and the lack of interest in Hindu issues?
It's a very relevant question. And before I explain about why there is silence, maybe I'll just take a few minutes to explain the fact about how we Hindus built a narrative that was unequaled. So as we know from neurosciences is that one of the highest powers of the brain is to build narrative. And our ancestors, thousands of years ago, built a narrative, from their experiences, from their stories, from observation about human condition. And in this, they brought down some of the deepest philosophical ideas about mental health, about how our brain behaves, how society, needs to grow. So if we take a wide variety, for example, of the works that we have had, Gita, or even the Gurukul Shishya, Parampara, and how it all integrates memory, knowledge, and feeling, in a way that is unequaled in any other part of the world. Vedas, Mahabharata, Panchatantra, Upanishads, they all start with a fundamental question. It doesn't start with commandments. Like if you see other faiths, they start with commandments, 10 commandments or this commandments. Our faith starts with questioning and the answer to a question. And in a tradition of, both Smriti and Shruti, the parents down the ages, they have been telling their children through the form of Shruti that, how we need to conduct ourselves, how we need to go ahead. And the resultant of that is that the Hindu brain, I would say, and I'm using the specific word Hindu brain, Hindu intelligence, has grown up to be unique. It is not only that of a survivor, but it is also something that can excel and, show itself in the highest forms. For example, if you see the recent film Oppenheimer, he talks about how Gita influenced him and how he did that. Many of the major top physicists, they use that. So we could develop the highest power, we could develop our brain to the highest power to build a narrative. And what our ancestors built was, continuing till the time the invasions happened and colonialism happened. The the utmost try of our invaders and colonialists was to destroy this narrative. They were not only, stupefied by it, but wondered at our everything, the architectural marvels, the libraries, the books that we have had. So they felt that if until and unless we destroy all this, we will not be able to go ahead and rule over these people. And we had turned too much inwards in order to be aware of that. Now, what happened as a result of all that trauma is that the Hindus, they fell into silence. And as I say again and again, that the language of trauma is silence. So, for example, picturize our ancestors hundreds of years back, seeing hundreds and thousands of temples destroyed across the country, libraries being burnt down, assaults and slaughters taking place. Generation after generation recorded that. It is unequaled in history in any other way. Even Will Durant, the most famous historian of the 20th century, said that the invasion of India and the barbarism that was shown is unequaled in the history of mankind. Now, all that produced a profound effect upon us, and we began to carry that in silence. That silence has broken now in the last 10, 15 years, and fault lines have appeared to show that we lost touch with our roots, and we could not, we need to connect with it once again. This is a civilizational quest for all Hindus, and all Hindu parents need to recognize that and teach it, to their children. I mean, the individuality that was very characteristic and the collective that was very characteristic of a Hindu went down. For example, if you see in most of North India, till very recently, festivals were not celebrated in a collective way. People did pujas inside at home. Like, for example, now you see hundreds of thousands of people going out in Navrata. It wasn't there till some time back, right? If you see our processions, they got there was so much of stone throwing and destruction of them, which still continues, because of which we almost stopped taking out processions, and even now we are very scared of taking out processions because only Hindu processions in India, they get stoned and attacked. So all this produced a tremendous amount of trauma, and we began to withdraw. We began to remove ourselves psychologically from people, from society, from public places, and withdrew to the safety of our home. In trauma, the most important aspect is that the sense of safety that governs us is gone. And for the Hindus, that sense of safety is something that we lost centuries ago, and something which we are trying to retrieve and build once again. And that is something which is only possible if Hindu parents right now teach about trauma and what we went through to their children, and the children are able to understand that and rise above it. There is no other way apart from that. So, another way, for example, when the group identity broke up, is that Hindus became competitive with each other. We, for example, there are a lot of sayings about, Hindus' biggest enemy. We go ahead and don't try to encourage or help or support each other. We do all that. It is, that competitiveness has been seen in slave societies, in societies that have been persecuted, and we need to understand that sense of cooperation and group work is something that is yet to come, which is a characteristic of many societies that follow Abrahamic faith. They did not undergo persecution like us that we have gone through for centuries. So I hope I have answered your question to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, this has given so many insights. So I see we in a way we've had two waves of colonization. One is the Islamic, and then we had the British. And I think the
Yeah.
methods of each were quite different in terms of
Yes, there were.
subjugating, right?
Yeah, the
Um,
British, the Islamic way destroyed our. They tried to destroy our warriors. The British tried to destroy us intellectually. The Brahmins, the groups which carried the intellectual wisdom of the centuries and thousands of years. Yeah,
yeah, so that's very important. So two important arms of the Hindu faith were actually destroyed between
yeah,
these two waves of colonization, right? Yeah.
right.
So
That's right.
you said you talked about Hindu festivals being celebrated within homes. You know, when you were saying that, it occurred to me that it is true that there are no real big temples in the north like you see starting from Orissa downwards, so the
Yes, that's
typical
right.
mandir structure, it's a typical temple
Yeah,
architecture, which is no more seen in any of the northern temples. And also, the other part that you said about not collectively celebrating, one of the things that any temple from Orissa onwards to the south, they have these temple Ratha Yatras, right? That,
yes,
they carry the deity on the thing. But we haven't heard something like that for any temple deity in the north. Is that true?
exactly.
And is that one of the manifestations of this factor that you said, that people started to celebrate within their homes
Sure.
rather than collective?
Very true. Like we had a temple manual called Shilpa Shastra by which temples were made. Now, you will not find any temples built with Shilpa Shastra in Delhi, and the oldest temple that you have is Birla Temple, built in 1939. And if you
Mhm.
look for records for 1,000 years, you will not find any temple. So why is it that we had a Shilpa Shastra, which was so well developed, which is shown in other parts of the country, but say not like Delhi, which was a completely Hindu city till 11th century, and after that stopped being a Hindu city. It was because all temples were destroyed, no new temples were allowed to come up, and the spire of the temple should not be seen beyond 200 meters. There was a edict that was built in the by one of the emperors. And most important, the fear, the trauma stayed in the mind of Hindus that they could not build. It was only changed in 1939 when freedom struggle was at its peak. People were fighting. There was a nationalistic fervor and spirit amongst the people. And that's the time when Birla Temple came up. Otherwise, if you see, there are medieval temples in Delhi, churches in Delhi, which belong to the medieval period, but no large temple using Shilpa Shastra. So that's an example of transgenerational trauma as to how Hindus lived in fear and survival for all these centuries. So that's one reason why you will find that in Orissa, in south of India, where probably it was not so much there, but in northern India. Like in Kashmir, for example, all the Hindu festivals are celebrated indoors. People withdraw during the festivals in a very proactive way to preserve themselves. Yeah.
It's quite painful to hear this, actually,
It
and
Yes,
is,
and
and
probably we are dealing with our own pain when we hear you saying this.
sure,
Unrecognized,
and that
actually.
very true, and that pain remains inside us. That pain is what we call transgenerational trauma. It has remained, and it is something that is passed on from generation to generation. And that pain is a silent one that is finding an expression right now through a Hindu resurgence and finding of identity.
so you've used a very powerful and interesting word here, transgenerational trauma.
Yes.
So, does that mean we can pass this on to our children for many generations without us being aware of it? Is that possible?
Yes, exactly, because the body records it. Trauma is passed on in silence, and it's passed on in silence because the brain goes into a survival mode. And when it goes into a survival mode, it doesn't feel like discussing it. So, for example, if you take the major genocides of the 20th century, let's take the Albanian genocide, the Armenian genocide, which happened in 1917. People, the third or fourth generations after that, they started raising it. Why didn't they raise it for almost 60, 70 years? Because they were busy with survival, because the brain had gone into a survival mode. So the parents' brain grows into a survival mode. The parents teach survival to the children. Their children teach survival to their next generation. It continues till a point comes when the generation starts feeling safe again, starts connecting to their roots, to their history, and they're no longer in the survival mode. So the whole thing starts happening again, that they look for their roots. If you see the Holocaust, there was two, three generations later, Holocaust films, literature started, coming up. If you see closer home, the trauma of Kashmiri Pandits, they ran away in 1989 and 90. They were thrown out of Kashmir, but they started in an active way speaking about it, after at least one or two generations later. It takes that kind of time to retrieve and find safety again in order to speak about it. So transgenerational trauma is something that we know is passed on from generation to generation till one generation decides that, okay, I need to find closure. I will not pass it on anymore. And it is something that probably important for our generation, so that we have the responsibility of finding closure for it, so that our children don't go through that.
So right now we have a public discourse that rewards actually, denying Hindu identity.
Yeah.
Kids are being pushed towards taking pride in disowning everything like maybe Hindu markers, maybe association with any rituals or traditions. All this is looked down upon. It's looked as regressive, as backward. And at the same time, there is quite a lot of silence from families, from within the families, about this phenomenon. What kind of effect does this have on a Hindu child?
I think, I would say that the word Hindu began to be associated with shame and humiliation. And this was as a result of colonial subjugation and trauma, feeling inferior. So it is something that there was no effort made at the time of independence for Hindu resurgence, for retrieving our cultural and historical heritage. That is something that we had lost. The rulers after independence were neither aware of it nor did they bother. I mean, they thought of themselves as Englishmen in mind, and only a brown skin by accident. So that is something that continued. And there was no effort at Hindu resurgence. The nationalist leaders like Patel or Subhash Chandra Bose, they never came to power, or that nationalistic philosophy was never allowed to take roots. So when it has now started taking roots, therefore things are changing right now in the country. And the rise of social media, where Hindus are able to talk about what went on with them. So therefore, they are able to they're able to discuss the shame, the humiliation. That was something that was transcribed in their DNA, and it is something that they are begin to overcome that. That is what I feeling that is taking place in our society, right? So I mean, in fact, sometimes I am asked too that you are a clinical psychologist. Why are you talking about Hindu shame and humiliation? It is because I see that as a distinct clinical characteristics. I mean, being Hindu means shame and humiliation. So many people talk like that. I mean, I am part of there are some groups which I am on with. They are of Hindu American parents whose children they lost to conversion, they were brainwashed. There are many parents who say that our children face humiliation at school, whether it was over the deity Ma Kali or Durga or others. Fun is made of the deities. Very often, children they keep it to themselves. They don't talk about that, and when they are made fun of by their friends, like for example, you have a deity who holds, from whom blood is coming out from her hands, or, her tongue is coming out, or she has got all these hands. She stands like this. I mean, children, it's important to know they feel ashamed when they are made fun of, mocked at in schools like that. There are parents, countless parents, who have asked me for therapy, for counseling, as to how to, prevent their children from getting into that. There are many parents who have told me in private that their biggest fear is that their children will convert in one or two generations, and asked me, how do I go ahead and stop that? I was in New Jersey some time back, and there was at this temple, and there was this group of parents who were sitting there. They had brought their children. So we started talking. I had also gone to visit there. And they said, we have brought because on the weekends we literally force them to hear Hindu shlokas and mantras, and we feel that by doing that we can stop them from converting, because they see other religions as superior. There are many parents like that. It is still something which is couched in silence. So if some parents say that, look, my children don't talk like that, or I haven't come across that, it is something that they are not aware of, they're in denial. And it's important to know that just because it is not happening with you today, it doesn't mean it is not happening with other people. Many other people are going through that. And this is a competitive aspect of the Hindus. For example, a Christian or the Muslim who hears about Christian or Muslim persecution across the world immediately believes it. For example, if you hear that a single Christian has been persecuted, whether real or imaginary, in India, immediately, organizations across in the white world, in the Western world, they start speaking. Muslims start speaking. We Hindus do not trust or believe in the persecution of other Hindus. That's a very competitive nature that Hindus developed with each other as a result of colonialism and trauma. It is something that we need to understand. It's a well-known psychological phenomena that under slavery, you turn competitive with each other because resources are very limited. You have to fight for it to get the best for yourself. You don't have to do that if you are a colonialist or if you are a master. So therefore, we Hindus develop that deep competitive fighting with each other, even leading to things like Hindu ही हिंदू का सबसे बड़ा दुश्मन होता है, एक हिंदू दूसरे के साथ कैसे कर सकता है. We need to understand that we developed it as a result of colonialism.
It does
Yeah.
put a lot of perspective to what's happening. Just to take your point further, you talked about parents sending their children over the weekends to maybe Bhagavad Gita classes or shloka
Yeah.
chanting and things like that. I think we have seen that that is absolutely no guarantee that the child will
No.
not convert. So
No, not at
what
all.
then is important?
In fact, I think I forgot to tell the rest of the story because I asked the children that, how do you find it? And they were all, they said, boring, stupid,
Wow.
and we are only here because our parents are telling us to do so. So then I sat with them and I talked about, the Hinduism, the Hindu warriors who defended Hinduism. They listened with rapt attention. I talked of the struggle of Hinduism, their parents, how they preserved Hinduism. And they said, we never knew that. I said, yes, you belong to that race. You belong to those people who gave their lives, who fought to preserve one of the highest levels of knowledge. And I use terms from neuropsychology, from biology, from sociology to explain that. There were teenagers, grown-up children who understood those terms, and they said, "Okay, we never saw Hinduism, or we never saw it in that way. Why can't our parents teach us that in that way?" I said, "It's very important. Go and tell your parents that they need to, instead of forcing you to come, which makes you more angry with your religion, with your faith, you need to understand the true nature of your faith. Who are your ancestors that who should be proud of, right? They were good ancestors. They knew that they faced one of the biggest threats that anyone can face, the destruction of their culture, their civilization. They passed it on through Shruti. They passed it on for you, for there is a legacy that you carry." So the children were absolutely, taken up with that and said that, okay, we never knew. Now we can even go ahead and confront our friends if any one of them makes fun of it. So that kind of parenting is very necessary for Hindu parents today, to give that kind of a knowledge and information, so that children know that what legacy they carry. We are leaving a big vacuum in that area, whether in India or whether in USA. It is Hindu parenting is something extremely important right now for us to, save our civilization.
That is one of the primary reasons we started this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, totally a phenomenal perspective, absolutely necessary for Hindu parents to hear, because most of us are caught in this endless cycles of teaching them samskar, teaching them this and that. But really,
Sure.
that doesn't go a long way at all. I mean, we have to address the root of the emotion of shame and guilt you feel deep inside that we are not talking about.
Sure.
So
Sure.
when,
It's
yeah,
like
so when,
a similar example is how for example, the Jews, they were deeply fragmented at the end of Second World War after the Holocaust. And they taught, they became a collective nation they became a collective and a very strong collective by teaching it to their children as to why, their ancestors, they fought for survival. So there is a deep sense of pride they instilled in their children. The same today is, being done by many other societies, Native American societies. If you see the blacks, they talk in terms of their resilience, their strength to withstand the worst of that slavery could do. And that's where they're discovering, their strengths. And we Hindus, the Hindu parents need to do the same to show that, I mean, sanskars, teaching principles are extremely necessary. Nobody is denying that. But alongside that, you also need to teach your history, the history of the last 1,000 years, how we overcame that, right? That is very important. Otherwise, it becomes so dissociated and disconnected that children are not able to connect to that.
and when
Absolutely.
we listen to you, it feels so liberating even for us. So we can imagine what kind of an effect this perspective will have on the future generations of children, to know that,
Uh,
first of all, this is a common phenomenon across the world and we are not the only ones facing it, so that we don't feel,
exactly.
guilt over the shame or shame over the guilt. These two are so
No,
tightly woven for us.
sure.
Sometimes we just get frustrated not knowing how to handle these emotions, and everything starts at the emotional level, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, neuroscience, that's what it teaches us, that emotions organize the brain, that it is, and the emotions like guilt and, humiliation, which has been of our history, which our ancestors faced and dealt with it powerfully, they contain a lot of energy. This energy is called sublimation, that how you can convert this into a very powerful emotion that can bind us together. So it is not a destructive thing. It's a very constructive thing. It's like, when we face it, we confront it, we bring it out into the open. That's what gestural therapy talks about. And it can be done through parenting. We become a powerful family. We become a powerful nation in the process. I mean, if you see, I mean, I'm a professor. I'll give you an example. When I teach trauma, post-traumatic stress. Whenever I talk about trauma, sometimes the Kashmiri Muslim in my class gets up and says, "This is the trauma I face." There are sometimes Christian students who get up that say, "This is the trauma I faced." A Hindu student never gets up and trauma. So once I caught hold of a Hindu student and I said, "Your family ran away from Kashmir, you lost members, you have told me that. So why didn't you get up in the class and say, 'This is something I have gone through'?" He says, "My family has told me to remain silent and not talk about it," right? So this is a message that Hindu parents should not give. They should not say, "Be silent." They should say that, yes, speak up in appropriate forums. Let us discuss it amongst ourselves so that we are not ashamed of talking about it. We own it. We take responsibility for it. And it's only through that we can change and, kind of retrieve the glory of our civilization that's lost.
I think this also happens because there's some kind of a feeling that talking about trauma is for weaklings, that it will make our children weak, demotivated, or scared and worried. So it
Yeah.
seems to be running in cycles. And the other point is, many parents also have reacted like, what kind of a problem do you see? I don't see any problem. My children are fine. We are earning well. We've done well for ourselves. Nobody is persecuting us. What are you talking about? So, the reactions range from either this extreme or that extreme. So this
Yeah.
is something that we need to start talking about a lot among ourselves first, isn't it?
Sure, very true. Like, for example, when in the Second World War and when Jews were being persecuted, there were Jews in USA who said, but nothing is happening to us. Why should we worry about other people? Or is it really happening? It's not something very minor. So it's important to know that whenever trauma is, there, it is always minimized. You don't see it till it kind of manifests itself and does it totally. Like if you take the Second World War, a lot of people in Europe did not see it coming. A lot of people didn't even believe that it would happen, right? That, Hitler would go ahead and attack. So there is the attempt by people to minimize it till it becomes too big. So the parents who are doing that, they are like parents in the well. And as I said it earlier, that, because of long periods of slavery, we became competitive. We only learned to see what is in front of us, not to care or compassion or show empathy for others. Like if there is a single, person of Abrahamic faith ever who's persecuted in India, immediately all around the world, the organizations speak up, right? Because the collective is so strong. But that is not the same thing for Hindu, right? So, and there are many Hindu parents who say that, oh, this is not happening to me. Of course, it is not happening to you, but it is happening to other people. Have compassion, have understand, have empathy, right? See why it is happening. It can happen to you tomorrow. What will you do then? Who will you go for help if this happens? So they don't have this, wide sightedness in order to see that it can also happen to me. And that is again a result of centuries of colonialism and trauma that we have undergone, right? So, and talking about trauma does not lead to being a weakling, right? But, societies or groups which have talked about it, taken ownership of it. I mean, let's look at the Jews. They talk about their trauma. Has it made them weak? They have one of the best, intellectual systems in the world, the largest number of Nobel laureates. If you see their country well developed, most scientific achievements, most things in the journal, and side by side, also they own up the trauma, the persecution that they have gone through. So owning up gives you a new strength, a new resilience that doesn't come from suppressing it and denying it. Let us understand that this is a basic psychological paradigm. This is a very basic psychological principle that owning up, talking about it, has never made you a weakling, right? It is not something that you caused it. It is something that your parents went through and they survived it and left it for you. So it is okay. Just because we were colonized doesn't make us weak today, but it tells us that, okay, why is it that we are colonized? We trusted people too much. We went inwards too much. And that is something that we need to change. It makes us stronger right now to distance ourselves from the mistakes we made in the past. If we repress it, don't talk about it, we keep on repeating it ad infinitum.
You worked with genocide and trauma victims probably
Sure.
from across the world. So, what's the closest example to the Hindu situation today? Have you seen this silence of
Yes,
trauma with any other group of people? Can you elaborate?
I sure. I have seen silence everywhere. I have seen it with Jews. I have seen it with Native Americans, with blacks, and I've also seen that silence breaking up. Like if you see, for example, the point of no return in Africa, where the blacks were transported to USA. I have seen their people getting up, sitting on the floor, and breaking up into tears, crying, and waking up with a new sense of energy, right? I have seen Native Americans claiming that, okay, this is where our ancestors were traumatized. They were buried alive. If you see, uh, if you if you've read about Bury Me at the Wounded Knee, and they refused the Dakota pipeline to pass through that area because it would disturb the memory of their ancestors, right? The same is for thousands of Hindu temples. The same is for the Ram Janmabhoomi place where Babri Masjid was destroyed. It's a sacred space. And I think that, when Hindus gather there, they're claiming their sacred space, saying that it was destroyed. Please understand. It's a similar situation. It has many similarities, except that I think the degree to which the Hindus went through, I do not find any other group having gone through that. Native Americans were killed in millions, in centuries by the whites who, went over there, right? The same for Hindus, but for Hindus, it started much earlier, repeatedly, and the civilization that they had built up was completely destroyed. So it differs in degree, but there are deep similarities that you see about the way the whites and invaders have carried out destruction to other civilizations.
Yeah, I think ours is really, as we said, it is about 1,000 years, two waves of colonization. I think the
Yeah,
Americas came into being, or the Northern America part has come into being only for the past 500 years. So,
sure.
of which probably 1 or 2 centuries they must have, or probably three
Yeah,
centuries they would have taken to annihilate the indigenous people. And slavery also lasting around that time. So, yeah, as you said, our time period is much longer, but but
yeah,
no one knows this. It's only now that we
sure,
even talk about it and talk about 1,000
sure.
years of practically slavery, we can say, right? Though we were not in
Yeah,
chains like the blacks, but our minds, our everything was chained in many ways, isn't it?
sure. I think the blacks were made into slaves, who did physical labor. And
Yeah,
when the British, they did not need to make us into slave. I mean, they didn't need to chain us. They
yeah.
they chained us. They realized that these people can be chained perhaps through intellectual subversion, deception, and control. So that is what they did for us. Yeah,
I think the first wave had sufficiently softened us up, physically, that we were emaciated through some 500, 600 years of constant genocide, actual wiping us out. So I think we were
sure.
sufficiently, emaciated bodily. And then it was the turn of the next wave to colonize us
Yeah.
intellectually, right? That
And
is
you know
what
what? Nobody
happened.
wants to talk about genocide. Like, if you see the history of genocide, the very definition ran into difficulties at the end of Second World War
Yeah.
because, America wanted to hide its genocide of Native Americans.
Hmm.
Russia, they wanted to hide, their, genocide. Britain and France, its history of colonialism, and they all wanted to hide. So therefore, it's not easy to talk about genocide. So if we talk about, say, for example, Hindu genocide and its attempt to destroy the attempts of the invaders and the whites to destroy our civilization, it is not easy talk for them. Britain doesn't acknowledge it still, right? So therefore, we have to speak about it, and only when we do it at the mass scale. I mean, it should not be left to a few intellectuals or activists. It is something that every parent must teach that to the children, for the future generations. That is the responsibility that every Hindu parent has, to teach their history of resilience and how their ancestors overcame trauma. And so today we become good ancestors for the future generations. So we find a closure for what we have gone through, stop the cycle that is going on, and convert it into a powerful energy, that the way we are doing it right now. I mean, if you see, Hindus, Indians are in actually right now the top positions all over the world. We
That
are,
is
doing things like no other. I mean, it's incredible that, for example, whether it's Microsoft or NASA or the medical system in the white nations that the Hindus run today, the discoveries or inventions that we are capable of making. And that comes from the narrative building that our ancestors did through, writing the Vedas, the Upanishads, all the texts like Mahabharata and Ramayana. We built the highest narratives that anyone else could ever do. And I think that is the way we need to teach our children individually in family homes, having family dinners. That is how we can pass on the spirit, for the children to feel proud that it is great to be a Hindu and I don't want to be anything else.
Right. So I think this also answers the next question that I had. What will happen if we do not talk about it? Because
Yeah,
many parents might not yet see the value in discussing all this with their children. It's like opening up of a raw wound.
So
So if
I
we just let it
understand.
fester, what will happen,
Yeah.
and why is it important to acknowledge this? That is a message that needs to go across.
If we don't do it now, we will not find closure. We will pass it on to the next generation and to the next generation till it erupts again, right? So it is the responsibility of this generation to go ahead and start the process that was undone. Like, let's take it, the Gurukuls were stopped in India. The
Mhm.
indigenous form of education was stopped by the missionaries. They have brought incalculable damage, to the country by fostering alien religion and alien culture, alien civilization, and put that as superior to the local culture, the local civilization that existed, right? So until and unless we reverse this process in this generation, we will leave it to the future generations to reverse it. But it will happen because it cannot be suppressed indefinitely. But in this generation, if we do it, we will find the joy, the satisfaction of seeing the change that takes place and permanently erases, changes the trauma that has held us, bound us for all these centuries. So that is the joy that we will have if we change it right now in front of us. I mean, how much joy we feel, for example, fighting for what has been denied to us. I mean, how much joy, freedom, or breaking loose the shackles that bind us gives us that. So I think let us not deny our children, our grandchildren, that joy that can come if we take that step right now today. So that is what I would like to say.
Yeah, so
Wonderful.
actually, I wanted to ask you, have we as a collective tried to address this at different points? For example, if you see probably Shivaji Maharaj's reign, or
Yeah.
maybe, the Ganpati movement in during the time of the freedom struggle, where Ganpati
So,
festival celebration was made as a public spectacle, and
so.
people were asked. So, would you consider these, or maybe Shivaji
Oh, yes.
Maharaj's Hind, the whole, you know, he had almost the entire subcontinent under him at one time, or his
Uh,
lineage. So, would you consider
uh,
these as
oh,
attempts
yes.
by us to overcome this trauma?
Absolutely. I think there is no equal to Shivaji Maharaj, what he did and his struggle, or the Ganapati festival. There have been numerous attempts that we have done. Only thing is that we have not been able to maintain it. So we started this. We did show that what we are capable of and what is our heritage, but we could not maintain it. Today, when we do that, when we reverse that process, it's also equally important for us that not only we do this, but also we are able to maintain that. So I would definitely consider these two the probably the biggest attempts on our part to retrieve our heritage, our civilization. And now the important thing is to take our lessons from that and think of maintaining it.
Yeah, so this is a very important lesson, no, that we cannot rest on laurels. We may
No,
gain some victories, but to sustain it, we always have to keep in mind that we have been victims of such a long period of
so
suppression. So it
yeah.
is for us. I
In
think
victim,
these were not articulated like this earlier. So now, since we have the
yeah,
terminology and the words to describe what we went through, I think we should keep in mind that we should never allow this to
so
happen to us one more time, right?
exactly. And I think victim research shows that victims very often overtrust, they become complacent. And the
Mm,
fact is that, you know, one of the things that for example, we can learn from, say, the Jews, is that the Jewish people is that when, yes, they understood that they have gone through victimization, and when they reverse the victimization, they have to maintain it every day. There is no loosening that. So you
mm.
develop the institutions, you develop the methodology by which you never go through something like that again. Now they did that after they went through Holocaust and realized that The world did not come to their help. And we also need to understand the world doesn't care for us. The world
True.
doesn't care for Hindus. We need to care for ourselves. We need to build for ourselves the institutions that will maintain the thing for us for generations. So developing those institutions is crucial. And the overtrust or the competitiveness that we show right now, it will go away once we understand the need and the necessity that why institutions are necessary. Like one of the ways the Jewish people have done that is by building numerous museums. They have
Mm.
built numerous they have written numerous books, numerous films, which show what they have gone through. And they continue doing that even 75 years, 80 years after what they went through. They are doing it and they will continue to do it for the next 100, 200, 300 years. It's a living reality for them. They stop at a certain time in the year in order to pay homage to their ancestors who died. They keep that alive. So keeping that alive on a regular almost a daily basis is what I consider important. In fact, sometimes, I mean, when I was talking about the Birla Temple, I
Mm.
think that, for example, when the Birla Temple is, there, outside that, there is no board saying that this temple was actually built after a gap of almost 1,000 years. When I spoke to a few people, they said, no, let us not do that. It'll hurt a lot of people. We need to get over that mentality that it'll hurt a lot of people. Let it be. They need
Yeah.
to understand that, we should stop getting into that, we will hurt other people. That scare must go. When we are
Mm.
building the Ram temple, we need to write the struggle that people went through that. If there are guides which are taking people around that, they should not only talk about that it was the birthplace of Bhagwan Ram, but also the struggle that went in the last 500 years. Our children, our grandchildren must know the struggle. They must know that what people sacrificed in order to make it possible. The same for Kashi Vishwanath, the same for every other temple in India. Hindu children must understand that how temples were destroyed and how it is important that they were places of culture, of civilization. They were not just places where you folded their hands in front of a deity. They were educational, cultural, spiritual, religious, sports centers. Our civilization grew around temples. So the children need to be told. The children need to be explained that why it can only grow around temples. Once again, a temple is not just a place where you go and fold your hands and take some prasad and come back. It's a spiritual, it's a altogether overall center for entire human growth and development like no other probably institution has done that in human history. So that is the way Hindu parents need to take their children to the temples and also explain to them at home about our culture and civilization.
Yeah. To go back to your point about Shivaji Maharaj, I was just
100.
thinking the sad part is that most Hindu children don't even know that now. That brings
Sure.
up the point about history taught to our children in textbooks, which is
Yeah.
so different from what he or she learns from the memory of elders in the family and from things that are
So
simply not spoken about. The silence is actually speaking here. So, isn't
yeah,
this
that's right.
creating a big dissonance, confusion for all of us?
Uh, Yes, in a way, but I mean, the battle between history and memory is perpetual. And particularly for societies that have undergone persecution, memory is a more powerful determinant of the continuation of the society than history. As we know that history is written by victors, history is written by people who rule us. So memory is our only refuge, and we trust memory more than we trust history. So, I mean, history has been manipulated. History can be, distorted and passed on in a highly deformed way, but memory cannot be. Memory remains something rooted in our experience and in a generational form. So, for example, a father telling the memory of what they had gone through, the family secrets, the family history, has a certain element of truth, a certain element of wisdom in it that history can never have. So the battle between history and memory is permanent. And right now, it's memory that's winning over history in India. And I think that parents need to also teach that to their children as to how memory is winning. The history that we were taught in textbooks has not been able to take deep roots within us, so much so that it could brainwash us permanently. The memory that is coming up, the memory of our persecution, the memory of our resilience and what we achieved is overtaking history. It's a beautiful moment in history to which, at a point of time, which we are all witness to. And I think that parents need to take pride in that and tell that to their children that we exist at such a beautiful moment at a point of time right now. So they need to explain this battle between history and memory as something perpetual in which memory always wins. History can never replace memory.
But it's also important to act before the memories go away permanently, isn't it? I mean,
the memory doesn't go, memory doesn't really get erased or goes away. I mean, if you see the memory of things from thousands of years back still remains with us. It remains in one form or another because it is not something that can be distorted and changed, like the way history can be distorted and changed. History has a motive, memory doesn't. Memory is something that, and that's where it's the battle between perhaps truth and falsehood. So if I tell what happened to my family when we went through a trauma, it is something that I'm doing it with no ulterior purpose or motive in my mind. But when I write history, there is an ulterior purpose or motive, except for, I think, when genuine historians who are subdued, like in our country, Jodunath Sarkar or other who were genuine historians, their version was brought down. But memory is something that is spoken by people who are persecuted. Memory is done by, for example, blacks have a memory, whites have a history. So, and the all-powerful history of the whites, whether it is Columbus discovered America or there was hardly any persecution of blacks, right, has not been able to, suppress or erase what happened to black for 200 years, right? Okay. So it is something that, emerges its head again and again, and it will continue to do so. It cannot be erased.
Fascinating. This last point has been extremely fascinating.
yes.
The perpetual fight between memory and history. This is one that I've not heard before, so it's really deeply satisfying to hear this. That whatever may happen, memories will not fade away, and there is a
Sure.
chance for renewal every time. So I
Yeah,
think this has
memory
been
wins.
yeah. So this has been an absolutely enriching and actually in many places very overwhelming conversation for us. So I think even personally, as we go through this conversation, we are dealing with our own trauma
Sure.
too. It's been wonderful.
Yes. Any message for parents on a practical note?
Yeah, I will say that a note both on theoretical and practical, so that it is important to be a parent, and it is important also to be a Hindu parent, because being a Hindu parent means also something very unique, very special to yourself, like no other with the generic term of parenting cannot cover. Most of the parenting right now is coming from a theoretical foundation of Western perspective, which sees parenting as very different. But our ancestors developed a sense of parenting long back, and it is something which is very beautiful. As a clinical psychologist, from Harvard, I have studied parenting across many cultures, many places, and I find that the theoretical concepts of Hindu parenting are so beautiful, so sublime, so unique, that there is, nothing like it. And it is important that we, while other Abrahamic faiths, they developed a concept of Christian parenting, Islamic parenting. We had a concept of Hindu parenting, thousands of years back. It got erased, it got, suppressed, and it is important that we retrieve it right now and we teach it. It's the most sublime thing that I think that has existed in the history of mankind.
So I think then we will call you back for a
Sure.
lesson on Hindu parenting, what are Hindu
Sure.
parenting norms and what is
Sure.
sublime about Hindu parenting. I think we'll do
Sure.
that in a future
Yeah.
podcast.
I just wanted to ask you about your book, The Infidel Next Door. So
Sure.
I understand that all these points have been mentioned in the book,
Yes,
the work
many
of
of them.
fiction.
Sure. It's a work of fiction, but it has like most fiction, many fiction, it has a grain of truth in this. It is about the Hindu child's search for his identity, for his roots, and how does he go, for that. So it's a book that I wrote after working extensively with the Kashmiri Hindu population and seeing that how we try to retrieve our civilization, our heritage. So that's what the book is based upon. So all those who are interested may read that and may find many of these principles that I've talked about written in that. That's what many of the parents have told me, that after reading it, they have given it to their children and their children have found it deeply healing.
So this is available on all platforms, right? It's on Amazon.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so we will
Wonderful.
give links to the to the platforms where your book is available. We request
Sure.
all our listeners to please read this book, even if it's a work of fiction. Obviously, all fiction always has a grain of truth in them. And
Sure.
we thank you profusely, Dr. Mitra, for spending all this time with us and explaining so beautifully so many things. And I'm sure our listeners will absolutely take away many, many points from this discussion that we've had. And we look forward to having you back on the podcast another time. We request all our listeners to please subscribe to us on our platform, hinduparenting.substack.com, and also do follow us on all social media. We go by the name Hindu Parenting everywhere, all popular social media channels. And please do follow Dr. Rajat Mitra too. We will provide all his social media coordinates in our post. So thank you and namaste.
Namaste.